When my boyfriend called me disgusting for describing my pregnancy symptoms at our baby shower, I decided he was right and never told him another thing about the pregnancy, including when I went into labor. I'd been with Hayden for 4 years when he humiliated me during our baby shower at this upscale resort he insisted on booking in Willow Creek. My cousin asked why my eyes looked so red, and I explained that this morning I threw up so hard that the blood vessels in my eyes burst. Hayden exploded on me. Shut up. Nobody wants to hear about your bloody eyes and vomit. Can you just be pregnant without making it everyone else's problem? It's revolting. The entire room went silent. His own sister tried to intervene, but he doubled down. What? I'm supposed to pretend all this isn't gross. Yesterday, she described how her nipples are leaking. Last week, it was about her discharge and stretch marks. We get it. You're pregnant. Your body is doing nasty things. His mom gasped, Hayden, she's carrying your child. That doesn't mean I need to hear about every disgusting thing happening to her. This is supposed to be a happy day and she's making me lose my appetite. I set down my drink. You know what? You're absolutely right. I won't disgust you with any more updates, Hayden. He looked at me, surprised then pleased. Finally, thank you. See? Not that hard to keep all that private. 2 days later, Hayden found me getting dressed for my 20-week anatomy scan. What time is the appointment? I'll drive. Oh, I'm going alone. I don't want to subject you to disgusting pregnancy stuff. His face scrunched up. But we find out if it's a boy or girl today. Yeah. And that involves the technician pressing a wand covered in gel all over my stomach while we look at our baby's private parts on a screen. Plus, they measure all the organs. Pretty gross medical stuff. That's different. No, it's not. You said pregnancy details revolt you. I'm respecting that. I took an Uber, and when he showed up, I made him wait outside the doctor's office in Pinewood Medical Center. The next day, his mom called him crying tears of joy. You're having a boy. He looks perfect. And you better have already apologized to your fiancé. Hayden put the phone down and stormed into the bedroom. You said the doctor said we'd have to wait another few weeks before gender shows? I only said that not to disgust you. I didn't want you losing your appetite. You can't keep the gender from me. I'm not keeping anything. I'm protecting you from revolting pregnancy talk just like you asked. When people asked about baby names, I'd discuss them enthusiastically with everyone except Hayden. Our friends knew we were considering Lucas. His parents knew about Ethan. His brother knew about Noah. Why won't you tell me the names you're considering? Discussing the baby requires mentioning pregnancy. That's off limits, remember? This is insane. This is literally what you demanded. At 28 weeks, I started experiencing concerning symptoms. My feet swelled so badly that when I pressed them, the indents stayed like memory foam and my vision kept getting black spots. I went to Willow Creek General Hospital alone. When they diagnosed me with preeclampsia and admitted me for monitoring, I texted everyone except Hayden. He found out when his brother called asking why he wasn't at the hospital. You're in the hospital and didn't tell me? Medical details about pregnancy are TMI. You said so yourself. You could lose the baby. And you could get so grossed out by looking at me, you'd call me disgusting. And the stress would definitely make me lose it. He went quiet. When the doctor scheduled my C-section for 36 weeks due to complications, I didn't tell Hayden. I informed his family, my family, our friends, everyone but him. The baby is coming next Tuesday, his sister told him. Hayden called me frantically. Tuesday? You're having our son on Tuesday? Yep. Didn't want to disgust you with talk about them cutting through my abdomen layers and pulling a baby out of my uterus. I need to request time off. Why? You don't want to see gross pregnancy stuff. It's literally the birth of my child, which involves all the disgusting things you hate hearing about. Blood, amniotic fluid that looks like chicken soup, the placenta that looks like raw liver. His mom tried mediating at dinner while Hayden was damn near crying. He knows he messed up. He said he's sorry, but he needs to be there. I just shrugged. He said pregnancy updates make him sick. Birth is the ultimate pregnancy update. I didn't mean the birth, Hayden protested. You said every disgusting thing happening to her. Birth is exactly that. The morning of my C-section, I called the Uber while Hayden was in the shower. I texted him once I started getting ready to go under. Having the baby now. Don't want to disgust you with the details, so talk later. When I woke up, he was already there in the hospital room, wild-eyed. You didn't tell me you were leaving. This is the problem, Hayden. I just had our son and woke up from life-threatening surgery. And your first words are me, me, me. He went pale. I missed my son's first moments. It's okay, I told him. I'm sure it all looked revolting anyway. I'm his father who finds the reality of pregnancy disgusting. I was protecting you from TMI. The nurse knew about the situation and looked at him with contempt. "Oh, you're the one who thinks pregnancy is gross?" "Yeah," she told us. "We've never had a father who didn't want updates before." Hayden fell into the chair, then looked at me, then over at the room they were supposed to bring our baby out of. "You know what?" he said, standing up. Then he started walking to the door. "Hayden, Hayden." He didn't stop or turn around even though I just yelled his name twice. The door swung shut behind him, and I was alone in that hospital room with machines beeping around me. The nurse came over and adjusted my IV bag while shaking her head. She muttered something about men who can't handle what they dish out but can't take the consequences. I tried to sit up more, but the incision from the C-section sent sharp pain through my whole middle. The nurse helped me adjust the bed and checked my vitals while I stared at that empty doorway. 20 minutes passed before they finally wheeled in a clear bassinet with my son wrapped in a blue and white striped blanket. The nurse lifted him carefully and placed him in my arms for the first time. He was so small with tiny fingers that grabbed at nothing and a scrunched up face that looked like an old man. My phone started buzzing on the side table, and when I looked, it was Hayden's mom calling. I answered with one hand while holding my baby with the other. She was talking fast, asking why Hayden just showed up at her house sobbing and wouldn't tell her what happened. I told her flat out that he walked out right after I woke up from surgery. The line went quiet for a long moment before she said she was on her way to the hospital. About an hour later, a woman with a clipboard knocked and came in, introducing herself as a social worker. She pulled up a chair next to my bed and started asking gentle questions about my support system at home. Did I feel safe going back there, and did I have people who could help me with the baby? I started from the beginning, telling her about the baby shower and how Hayden called my pregnancy disgusting in front of everyone. She took notes while I explained how I'd kept him out of appointments and how he'd missed the birth. She nodded and said emotional abuse during pregnancy was serious and they needed to make sure I had proper support. Hayden's mom arrived while the social worker was still there and immediately started crying when she saw her grandson in my arms. She came over and touched his tiny hand, then looked at me with tears running down her face. She said Hayden told her everything about what he'd done, and she was absolutely disgusted with her own son. Then she asked if she could still be part of the baby's life, even if Hayden and I didn't work things out. I told her of course she could and handed her the baby to hold. The social worker watched this and made more notes before saying she'd check back tomorrow. That second day in the hospital, my phone wouldn't stop going off with texts from Hayden. First, he was sorry and begging to see the baby, then angry, saying I was keeping his son from him, then back to apologizing and saying he'd do anything to fix this. The messages kept coming every few minutes, switching between blaming me and begging for forgiveness. The nurse saw me getting stressed and showed me how to put my phone on Do Not Disturb except for emergency calls. She said I needed to focus on healing, not dealing with his drama. The hospital told me they couldn't discharge me without confirming I had safe housing and someone to help me at home. I had to decide if I was going back to the house Hayden and I shared in Willow Creek or finding somewhere else to stay. Hayden's sister called and offered to come stay with me for the first week to help with the baby and recovery. She said Hayden was staying at their mom's house, so I wouldn't have to see him. I accepted because I couldn't lift anything heavier than the baby and needed help with basic things. Discharge day came, and the nurse was getting my paperwork ready when security called up to the maternity ward. Hayden was downstairs with flowers, trying to come up, but he wasn't on my approved visitor list. Security wouldn't let him pass the main desk without my permission, which I didn't give. He left the flowers at the desk with the note that the nurse brought up to me. I didn't read it right away, just stuck it in my bag with all the other discharge papers. Hayden's sister picked me up and drove me home while I sat in the back with the baby in his car seat. Walking into the house felt strange, like it belonged to someone else's life. The nursery we'd painted together and set up with all the furniture looked exactly the same but felt completely different. Hayden's sister helped me up the stairs, holding my arm since I couldn't use my stomach muscles yet. She'd already moved into the guest room and had groceries in the fridge. Hayden storms out after she wakes up from surgery. That's telling. I wonder if he's running from guilt or just can't handle being confronted with what he caused by missing his son's birth. Hayden was staying at his mom's house, and his sister made sure he knew not to come by. Everything hurt, and I could barely walk to the bathroom without help, but at least I was in my own bed. My milk came in on day 3, and my chest felt like rocks that were on fire. I was sitting there crying from the pain, trying to pump, when my phone buzzed with another text from Hayden. He was asking if he could come see the baby and promising he'd only stay a few minutes. I texted back that I needed to focus on healing and would contact him when I was ready. He sent 5 more messages, but I didn't read them, just deleted the notification. The pediatrician appointment was in 2 days, and Hayden's name was on the insurance, so I had to text him the basic information. Just the date and time, nothing else about how the baby was doing or how I was recovering. He immediately texted back, asking if he could come to the appointment and drive us there. I told him I'd already arranged transportation with his sister, and he didn't need to come. He kept texting, but I turned off read receipts and stopped responding to anything that wasn't absolutely necessary for the baby's care. The pediatrician appointment arrived 2 days later, and I strapped the baby into his car seat while Hayden's sister drove us to Willow Creek Pediatric Clinic. The waiting room was full of other new moms and crying babies, and I filled out the paperwork with one hand while holding my son with the other. When they called us back, the nurse weighed him and measured his length before the doctor came in asking about family medical history. She needed Hayden's side for genetic conditions and allergies, and I realized I couldn't completely cut him off from medical information about our son. I texted him, asking for his family's health history, and he immediately sent back paragraphs of information plus offered to come to future appointments. The doctor noticed my hand shaking and asked if I had support at home. I told her about the situation, and she handed me a stack of pamphlets about single-parent resources and postpartum support groups. Back home that evening, Hayden's mom called, asking if she could help with the night feeding since she knew I was doing everything alone. She showed up at 9 with her overnight bag and took over the 3 a.m. feeding without me even asking. She never mentioned Hayden unless I brought him up first and just focused on helping with bottles and diapers and laundry. On my 5th day home, I finally opened the envelope from the flowers Hayden left at the hospital. The note was 3 pages long, acknowledging how cruel he'd been at the shower and how he understood why I'd excluded him from everything after that. He wrote about being ashamed of calling my pregnancy disgusting when I was growing our child and admitted he'd failed as a partner when I needed him most. I folded it back up and stuck it in the drawer with the hospital discharge papers because words didn't mean anything compared to actions. Hayden's sister was changing the baby when she mentioned that Hayden had started seeing a therapist twice a week. This surprised me since he'd always said therapy was for weak people who couldn't handle their own problems. She explained their mom made it a condition for him staying at her house and was paying for his sessions herself to make sure he went. 3 days later, I woke up with a fever of 101 and called my doctor, worried about infection from the C-section incision. Hayden's mom drove me to urgent care while his sister stayed home with the baby, and I sat in the waiting room feeling my incision throb with each heartbeat. The doctor examined the incision and found a small infection starting where one stitch hadn't dissolved properly. She prescribed antibiotics and asked about my stress levels since that could slow healing. I admitted things were complicated at home with the baby's father, and she wrote me a referral for a therapist who specialized in postpartum issues and relationship trauma. The antibiotics kicked in within 2 days and the fever broke, but I still felt exhausted from everything. 2 weeks after giving birth, Hayden's sister handed me a thick envelope that Hayden asked her to deliver. Inside was a formal letter, clearly written with help from his therapist, requesting a mediated discussion about establishing a co-parenting agreement. The letter used words like accountability and repair and taking responsibility for harmful behaviors that didn't sound like Hayden at all. I set it aside and called the family law office in downtown Willow Creek to schedule a consultation before agreeing to any meetings. The lawyer's office was on the 3rd floor, and I had to stop twice on the stairs to catch my breath since my stomach muscles were still healing. She listened to the whole story from the baby shower through the birth and took notes on a yellow legal pad. She explained that Hayden's behavior at the shower could be considered emotional abuse, and his pattern of missing appointments and walking out during birth would affect custody decisions. She helped me create a timeline documenting everything from the public humiliation to him leaving the hospital room to missing the actual birth. We went through my texts, showing I'd tried to include him in medical decisions while he complained about being excluded from everything else. She printed out screenshots of his messages and organized them by date in a thick folder. The pattern was clear when laid out chronologically, and she said I had strong grounds for primary custody with supervised visitation if that's what I wanted. She explained the difference between joint and sole legal custody and how physical custody schedules worked with newborns who were breastfeeding. The consultation took 2 hours, and by the end, I understood my rights and options better than I had before. She recommended waiting until I was physically healed enough to sit through a long meeting before agreeing to mediation. I texted Hayden's sister that I'd meet with him and a mediator once I hit 4 weeks postpartum and could sit comfortably for an hour. Hayden immediately started texting, asking if we could meet sooner, but I didn't respond and just forwarded his messages to the lawyer for documentation. The baby needed another feeding, and I focused on that instead of Hayden's demands for immediate meetings. Hayden's mom continued coming over for night feedings 3 times a week and never pushed me to forgive her son or rushed me to make decisions. She held the baby while I showered and cooked meals I could eat one-handed while nursing and became more like my own mom than his. The days blurred together with feedings and diaper changes and doctor appointments, and slowly my body started healing from the surgery. My phone buzzed with a text from Hayden's brother asking if he could come meet his nephew without Hayden there. I appreciated him respecting my boundaries and texted back that he could visit tomorrow while Hayden's mom would be helping me. The next afternoon, he arrived with a stuffed giraffe and held the baby so carefully like he might break. He mentioned Hayden talked about the baby constantly at work, but understood he'd messed up badly. He didn't push me to forgive Hayden or make excuses, just focused on being a good uncle and took photos with his nephew. After he left, my cousin from the baby shower showed up with 2 bags of groceries and put everything away while I nursed the baby. She'd been coming by every few days since I got home, holding the baby so I could shower or just sit without someone needing me. She reminded me how strong I was, standing up to Hayden when he humiliated me at the shower while I was already so vulnerable. She said most people would have just cried, but I protected myself and my baby from someone who couldn't respect what I was going through. 3 weeks after the C-section, I started pumping milk into bottles so other people could help with feedings. Hayden's mom naturally took over the 3 a.m. feeding shift since she was staying over 3 nights a week anyway. She mentioned while washing bottles that Hayden had asked about the baby's feeding schedule, but she told him that was my information to share when I was ready. She never pushed me to include him or made me feel guilty about keeping boundaries. The pediatrician gave me a referral for a postpartum therapist, and I went to my first appointment 4 weeks after birth. I spent most of the hour crying about how this wasn't the motherhood I'd imagined. I thought I'd have a partner helping with night feedings and doctor appointments, and instead, I was basically a single mom with his family helping. The therapist validated that I was grieving the partnership I thought I had while also trying to protect my child from further harm. She said it was normal to feel angry and sad and overwhelmed all at once. She helped me see that Hayden's cruelty during pregnancy wasn't just mean words, but actual emotional abuse that put me and the baby at risk. When I got home from therapy, Hayden's sister was waiting with an envelope. Inside were photos of a certificate from a parenting class, showing Hayden had enrolled in a 12-week program. I felt something crack slightly in my anger, but then remembered him calling my pregnancy revolting in front of everyone at the shower. I remembered him saying my body was doing nasty things and making him lose his appetite while I was growing his child. The certificate went in the folder with all the other documentation my lawyer was collecting. 2 more weeks passed with the same routine of feedings and diaper changes and his mom helping overnight. The mediation date we'd scheduled for 4 weeks, postpartum got pushed to 6 weeks when I still couldn't sit comfortably for long periods. Finally, the day arrived, and I drove myself to the mediator's office in downtown Willow Creek. Hayden was already there, and he looked terrible, with dark circles under his eyes and his clothes hanging loose like he'd lost weight. Hayden's family helping out this much while he's completely absent? There's something interesting happening here. His mom and sister seem to be filling the gap he left, but I'm curious about their real feelings toward his behavior right now. He started to speak, but the mediator redirected him to listen to me first about how his actions affected our situation. I explained how his public humiliation at the baby shower made me feel worthless and disgusting for experiencing normal pregnancy symptoms. I told them about throwing up so hard my eye vessels burst and him calling it revolting instead of showing concern. I described going to the hospital alone with preeclampsia because I couldn't trust him not to call my swollen feet and vision problems gross. I explained how I couldn't trust him with my medical care after he made it clear my pregnant body disgusted him. Hayden actually sat there and listened without trying to interrupt or defend himself. When I finished, the mediator asked Hayden if he wanted to respond. Hayden apologized without making excuses, admitting he was selfish and cruel, and let his personal discomfort override basic compassion for the person he claimed to love. He said he understood now that pregnancy was hard and scary, and he'd made it worse by making me feel ashamed of what my body was going through. He admitted he'd failed as a partner when I needed him most. The mediator asked what specific changes Hayden was making to address his behavior. Hayden pulled out a notebook and listed therapy twice a week with a counselor who specialized in emotional abuse recovery. He showed receipts for the parenting classes he'd already attended for 3 weeks. He had a stack of books about pregnancy trauma and postpartum recovery that he'd been reading to understand what I went through alone. He said he knew words meant nothing after what he'd done, but hoped to prove change through consistent actions over time. He wasn't asking for forgiveness or immediate access to the baby, just the chance to show he could be better. The mediator helped us create a basic framework where Hayden could have supervised visits starting with 1 hour twice a week at his mom's house. Hayden nodded and wrote it down in his notebook without arguing, which surprised both me and the mediator. The mediator helped us work out the details like pickup times and what supplies Hayden needed to have ready at his mom's house. I made a list of formula brand, diaper sizes, and emergency contact numbers while Hayden took photos of everything with his phone. His mom agreed to supervise every visit and send me updates, which made me feel slightly less anxious about the whole arrangement. The first visit was scheduled for the following week when I'd be 5 weeks postpartum, and I spent the entire week second-guessing myself. I packed the diaper bag 3 different times and wrote out feeding instructions, even though his mom had raised 2 kids herself. The morning of the visit, I drove to her house and handed over our son with shaking hands. Hayden was already there, sitting on the couch looking nervous, and his mom took the baby from me gently. I sat in my car down the street for the entire hour, checking my phone every 2 minutes. His mom sent photos showing Hayden holding the baby carefully with both hands supporting his head properly. In one picture, Hayden was looking down at our son with this expression of complete wonder mixed with fear. The baby was calm the whole time, according to the text, and even fell asleep in Hayden's arms. When I picked him up an hour later, Hayden handed him back without trying to extend the time or make any comments. The second visit went similarly, and by the third one, I managed to drive home instead of sitting in my car the whole time. After 3 successful visits, Hayden sent a message through the mediator asking if we could discuss gradually increasing the time. I thought about it for 2 days before agreeing to extend to 2 hours, but keeping the supervision requirement until he finished his programs. The mediator helped us adjust the schedule, and Hayden accepted the terms without pushback. My 6-week postpartum checkup came around, and I drove myself to the doctor's office, feeling physically better, but emotionally drained. The doctor examined my incision, which had healed well, and cleared me for normal activities, including exercise. She asked how I was doing emotionally, and I admitted that co-parenting with someone who'd hurt me was harder than the physical recovery. She gave me some resources for support groups and reminded me to prioritize my mental health too. That afternoon, Hayden's sister stopped by with groceries and mentioned Hayden had been going to therapy twice a week without missing a single appointment. She said he'd even started journaling about his feelings, which was shocking since he used to mock people who journaled. According to her, he seemed genuinely committed to understanding why he'd been so cruel and learning better ways to handle discomfort. She didn't pressure me to forgive him, but wanted me to know he was putting in real work. 2 weeks later, when the baby was 2 months old, Hayden sent another request through the mediator, asking to attend the next pediatrician appointment. I thought about it carefully and decided to allow it, but set clear boundaries that he could listen to medical information, but I made all decisions. The mediator communicated my terms, and Hayden agreed immediately. The appointment was scheduled for the following Tuesday, and I arrived early to check in and get settled before Hayden showed up. He came in quietly and sat in the chair by the wall instead of next to me on the exam table. When the pediatrician came in, she didn't know our history and treated us like any other parents. Hayden asked good questions about developmental milestones and took notes when she explained the vaccination schedule. He didn't make any comments about my choices or try to override my decisions about anything. The pediatrician mentioned we seemed to be co-parenting well, which felt surreal given everything that had happened. After the appointment, Hayden thanked me for letting him come and left without trying to extend the interaction. Later that week, his mom came over to help with laundry and mentioned how proud she was of how I was handling everything. She admitted she'd failed Hayden by never teaching him proper respect for women and always making excuses for his behavior. She said watching me set firm boundaries was teaching her about her own patterns of enabling him over the years. She apologized for not intervening sooner when she saw warning signs of his disrespect toward me. I appreciated her honesty, even though it didn't change what had happened. As the weeks passed, I started feeling more confident in my abilities as a mother. I realized Hayden's absence during those crucial early weeks had actually forced me to make decisions without someone questioning or criticizing my choices. Every decision was mine to make without someone questioning or criticizing my choices. The baby was thriving and meeting all his milestones, which proved I was doing something right. When he was 10 weeks old, Hayden sent a message through the mediator saying he'd completed his first month of parenting classes. He asked if he could share what he'd learned, and I agreed to read a written summary rather than meet in person. The summary arrived 2 days later and was more thorough than I expected. The pages went on for 12 typed sheets covering secure attachment, developmental milestones, and how stress hormones from pregnancy trauma affect both mother and baby long term. He'd researched every single thing he'd said to me during pregnancy and listed them out with timestamps. The baby shower comment got its own page, explaining how public humiliation during vulnerable moments creates lasting psychological damage. He wrote about the anatomy scan and how excluding fathers from gender reveals damages the bonding process he'd already broken. The preeclampsia section made me sit down because he'd printed out medical studies showing the mortality rates and included statistics about women who die from it. He understood I could have died alone in that hospital while he sat at home, angry about being excluded. My therapist appointment came 2 days later, and she watched me pace around her office holding the papers. She pointed out that my anger was valid but exhausting when I needed energy for night feedings and diaper changes. She asked if punishing Hayden was worth the toll on my own mental health. I spent the whole session crying about how unfair it was that I had to be the bigger person after everything. She reminded me that co-parenting meant thinking about what our son needed, not what would hurt Hayden most. 3 months postpartum arrived faster than expected, and the mediator suggested expanding visits to include 1 unsupervised hour. My stomach churned at the thought, but Hayden had completed 8 weeks of perfect supervised visits without any issues. We picked a coffee shop with big windows in downtown Willow Creek where I could see them from my car in the parking lot. I dropped the baby off in his carrier and watched Hayden's hands shake as he took the handle. I sat in my car for 60 minutes, watching the clock and crying so hard I couldn't see straight. Every few minutes, I'd check through the window and see Hayden carefully feeding him a bottle or walking him around when he got fussy. My phone buzzed exactly 1 hour later with Hayden standing outside, ready to transfer the carrier back. He thanked me 3 times and waited until I had the baby secured before walking to his own car. That night, a photo came through showing our son sleeping against Hayden's chest with the message thanking me for trusting him. Something inside me shifted just slightly. Not forgiveness, but maybe the first crack in the wall I'd built. Hayden's mom came over the next morning with groceries and mentioned finding medical textbooks about preeclampsia and C-sections all over Hayden's apartment. He had been studying what my body went through and told her he couldn't believe I survived it alone. Hayden's doing all the right things, therapy receipts, parenting classes, medical research, but something feels calculated about how perfectly he's checking every box. The way he had that notebook ready at mediation and documented everything makes me wonder if this is genuine change or just following a script to regain access. She said he broke down crying when he learned about HELLP syndrome and how close some preeclampsia cases come to organ failure. The swimming class recommendation came through the mediator as Hayden's therapist suggested parallel parenting activities. The community center in Willow Creek had a baby swim class where parents could both attend but focus on the baby instead of each other. I agreed, mostly because our son loved bath time, and I thought he'd enjoy the pool. We showed up at opposite ends of the changing area and entered the pool from different sides. The instructor didn't know our situation and treated us like all the other parents. Our son squealed with joy the second his toes touched the water and kicked his little legs so enthusiastically that other parents smiled. Hayden stayed on his side of the circle, but I caught him grinning when the baby splashed water in his own face and laughed. For 30 minutes, we both focused entirely on keeping our son happy and safe in the water. The awkwardness felt worth it when he fell asleep immediately after, exhausted from all the excitement. 4 months postpartum brought a letter from the parenting program instructor saying Hayden had completed all 12 weeks. She wrote that in 15 years of teaching, she'd never had a student more engaged or committed to change. She noted his perfect attendance, his thoughtful questions, and how he stayed after class, helping other fathers understand the material. Her professional opinion stated his remorse appeared genuine, and his dedication to breaking generational patterns seemed authentic. She included a copy of his final presentation about accountability and the harm of toxic masculinity during pregnancy. The custody agreement meeting took place in a lawyer's office with both our attorneys present. Hayden signed everything without arguing, accepting primary custody going to me with gradually increasing visitation rights for him. He agreed to continue therapy for a minimum of 1 year and submit to any additional requirements the court suggested. His lawyer mentioned Hayden had instructed him not to fight anything I requested. The child support calculation came out to a specific number, and Hayden immediately agreed to 20% above that amount. His mom told me later he'd taken a weekend job at a warehouse in Pinewood specifically to cover baby expenses. The automatic payments started hitting my account for formula, diapers, medical copays, and a college fund he set up. She said he worked 60 hours a week now between both jobs, but never complained about being tired during his visits. The development happened gradually over several visits, but around 4.5 months, our son started recognizing Hayden's voice. During one handoff, the baby heard Hayden say hello and immediately turned toward him with arms outstretched. My heart broke and healed simultaneously, watching Hayden's face crumple as he carefully took our son. Whatever had happened between us, whatever pain and anger remained, our son was reaching for his father with pure, innocent joy. 2 weeks later, Hayden sent a message through his sister, asking if we could try using a co-parenting app instead of going through his family for everything. I downloaded the one he suggested and set up my profile while the baby napped on my chest. The first message came through within minutes, asking about feeding schedules and sleep patterns. I typed back the basic information and attached photos of the formula brand and diaper size. He responded with a thank you and a promise to read all the pediatrician notes I'd uploaded. The app kept everything organized with timestamps and categories for medical info, schedules, and expenses. His mom mentioned he spent hours studying the app every night, learning our son's routines. The next pickup day arrived, and Hayden stood at my door holding the diaper bag he'd packed perfectly with everything on my list. He looked directly at me for the first time in weeks and said he understood if I could never forgive him, but promised to spend his life being the father our son deserved. Something in his voice sounded different, not desperate or angry, but genuinely committed. I nodded and handed over the baby, who immediately grabbed Hayden's nose and laughed. My therapy appointment that week focused on boundaries and growth. The therapist pulled out her notes from our first session 5 months ago when I could barely speak through tears. She pointed out how I'd gone from victim to survivor and now to someone who was actually thriving despite everything. She said the boundaries I'd set weren't just protecting me, but modeling healthy behavior for my son to see as he grew up. Her words stuck with me as I drove home and found Hayden's mom waiting with homemade soup. She'd been coming twice a week since the birth, regardless of what happened between Hayden and me. Over dinner, she mentioned how grateful she was that I'd given her a grandson and inadvertently given Hayden the wake-up call he desperately needed. She said I'd become like the daughter she never had. Her eyes got watery when she talked about how proud she was of how I handled everything. The 6-month pediatrician appointment came faster than expected. Hayden arrived early and sat reading parenting magazines in the waiting room when I walked in with the baby. The nurse called us back together and we followed her to the exam room where she weighed and measured our son. The pediatrician came in smiling and immediately commented on how well he was developing, hitting all his milestones perfectly. She mentioned how lucky he was to have so many people who loved him. Hayden and I made eye contact over our son's head and actually shared a genuine smile for the first time since the baby shower. The moment felt strange but not forced. Walking to our cars afterward, Hayden mentioned his therapy was going well and his counselor thought he was making real progress. That night, I sat feeding the baby and looked around my apartment at the life I'd built. Photos covered the walls of family and friends who'd stepped up when I needed them. The nursery was organized exactly how I wanted it. My schedule worked perfectly with the support system I'd created. Hayden was becoming a good father, even if he'd failed completely as a partner. The boundaries I'd set protected my peace while still allowing our son to have his dad. Everything looked different from what I'd planned, but it was mine, and it was working. Hayden's sister called the next week with unexpected news. Hayden had started volunteering at a pregnancy resource center in Willow Creek, teaching expectant fathers about supporting their partners through pregnancy and birth. The coordinator had reached out to his sister because Hayden listed her as a reference. She said Hayden used his own failures as teaching examples, warning the men about the damage their words and attitudes could cause. His therapist apparently suggested it as part of his healing process and accountability work. The coordinator was impressed with his honesty and commitment to helping other men avoid his mistakes. 6 months had passed since that horrible baby shower where Hayden humiliated me in front of everyone. My son was thriving with 2 parents who put his needs first, even if we couldn't be together. Hayden showed up consistently for every visit and doctor appointment. He read every parenting book his therapist recommended and implemented what he learned. His family remained my strongest support system, regardless of our relationship status. The co-parenting app kept our communication focused and documented. My therapy helped me process the trauma while building something better. Friends who witnessed everything said they'd never seen someone handle such a situation with more grace. The life we'd created looked nothing like the traditional family I'd imagined, but it was built on respect and boundaries and growth that had been earned the hard way. Thanks for sticking with me through all these thoughts and questions. It's been a pretty wild ride just wondering out loud together. Can't wait till our paths cross again. Subscribe for more content like this.